Hello everyone and welcome back. Hopefully everyone got a chance to step through the code that we wrote step by step using this test array. If you did, you noticed that this is pretty much the exact same step through process as what we did in our logical solution before we even wrote any code. Pretty much a one-to-one map of the logic we came up with. So I'm not actually going to do that with this question and this test array because it's not going to be that different from what we've already done, and I don't want to waste your time. Instead, what we'll do though is walk through one of our cases where max array returns 0. So let's just say we have an array of one element. Here we know that a container can only be formed with 2 elements, so theoretically let's see why our code causes this max array to return 0. In fact, if we run it, we'll see that what we get is 0, so let's just justify this. What we do is we first console.log the max area. We also want to console.log p1 and the value of p1, which is heights at p1. And inside we also want to console.log p2. Now we know we should never step into this for loop's value and log p2. The reason for this is because of our logic. We see that p1 starts and initializes at 0. What will happen is that p2 gets set at the value of p1 plus 1. So it's 0 plus 1, which gives us 1. That's what p2 gets set to. 1 is not less than heights.length, because here heights is an array of one value, meaning length will return 1. 1 is not less than 1, which means that it should never step into this for loop. And if we run our code, we'll see that that's what happens. We do log max area, which starts at 0, and then p1, which is our value of 5. p2 never gets logged because it doesn't actually step into our for loop. So then automatically it returns our current max area, which is 0, which is what we see right here. So that's the logic of stepping through one of our 0 cases. Now that we've done this, let's actually think about the big O. What is the space and time complexity of this function? So just by looking at this, we can probably tell that this is very similar to what we came up with in our original array question. We have 2 for loops, and as we know with 2 for loops, our time complexity is a big O of n squared. So here we see that nothing has really changed. We still have 2 for loops, and the logic inside doesn't really scale with our heights increasing. The main thing that changes is that we have to perform more operations for our first for loop and our second for loop. So based on that logic, we know our scalability is n squared. What about our space complexity? Well, with our space complexity, we're also not storing any scaling thing in our memory. Here we see that yes, we calculate height and yes, we calculate width, but these are all static values that don't change. Max area gets updated, but the size of max area, in the sense that the quantity of information we're storing, also doesn't change. So here we have a very similar situation where we have a time complexity of n squared and a space complexity of O of 1. So as we remember from our previous lesson, what we want to do is optimize the space by using up more of it so that we can bring our time complexity down. So that's going to be very similar to what we're trying to do again in our optimized solution. But before we do that, let's actually run our solution against LeetCode just to see. The exact question in LeetCode is number 11, container with the most water. And I've pasted our code that we just came up with into it, and let's submit and see how we do. So here we see that our memory usage is fantastic, 97%. We expected this though. We have an O of 1 space complexity, but our runtime is pretty bad. 22.39% is honestly really bad. But we expected this. We know that we have a suboptimal time solution, and we also predicted that our space would be great because it's O of 1. So how do we level this out a little bit more? Well, let's do that in the next lesson. We're going to actually explore a new technique with these 2 pointers that is going to really help us level up with our array questions and our understanding. So let's do that in the next lesson.